Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the DM supplement Traps, Trammels, and Triggers, designed by Grimm Press for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. I hope you like traps because that's what you're going to get. A trammel, by the way, I had to look it up, is a restriction or impediment to someone's freedom of action. So some kind of barrier or something. I didn't know that. Traps, trammels, and triggers includes 100 different traps, and each of those traps has several variants. I think about like 2 to 3 on average that alter the trap in some way. So, for example, if it's a pit trap, which of course is in here, it might be like sharpened spikes on the bottom, or poison spikes, or something that can change the trap, but it's still a pit trap. What you're gonna get is more than likely quantity over quality here. These are not big, complex, multi-step traps, but it does cover pretty much every kind of trap you would just about see in D&D that was a fairly simplistic trap. They're divided between mechanical and magical, although mechanical is kind of a misnomer. Basically, just means anything that's not magical, because it could be like a biological trap, for example. One that's like literally like a raven who's just announcing an alarm, or you're walking through a bunch of spider strands and like swarms of spiders come down. Those are classified as mechanical. It just means they don't have any magical components to them. So maybe naturally occurring would be a better state, although that's still, some of them are man-made. Anyway, in terms of organizing this book together, it's just alphabetical. And all we get are some traps that are in different categories. So some of them are designed to just announce the presence of a party in the dungeon, which are like alarm traps. Others don't necessarily do damage, but maybe just block off or seal a passage. Some of them are designed to like capture you in a way, or bestow some kind of debilitating effect, like blinding you or restraining you or something. And then of course there's a bunch that are just designed to harm or kill you. The bummer is we don't get the traps organized by level. Although at the beginning here it does say, obviously you can scale the DC and you can scale the trap depending on, and then it basically solves all the problem. Traps are infinitely scalable because you could just include whatever trap and then just set your DC and your damage just scaled to the players. I totally get that. That being said, obviously when the designer put all these traps together, they still used damage and DC. So it would have been nice to at least have some kind of suggestion for levels. And I think, in general, some traps kind of lend themselves to certain parties. Like I think a pit trap is obviously a very classic low level thing, whereas higher level players who have like, boots of flying and levitation, all this shit, that they're, a normal pit trap maybe is not going to quite do it for them, versus you might not throw like an anti-gravity room with sharpened spikes on the ceiling at low level players, for example. And sure enough, that's reflected in a lot of these trap DCs and damage dice that, some of them use like DC 19 and others are DC 12 or something. So weirdly enough, this does not have level scaling, which I found very annoying. But it does have some really cool trap ideas that cover pretty much everything that I could hope to see in terms of traps that aren't multi-step kind of puzzly traps. And this is coming from somebody who ran Tomb of Annihilation and ran the Tomb of the Nine Gods, which is, of course, heavily inspired from the classic Tomb of Horrors, which is a death trap dungeon. So I have seen a lot of those kind of traps, and I'm seeing some of them here reflected as well, for better or for worse, because I think it is nice to see those traps here. And not everybody has run, that adventure or owns that book to be able to see those. So for examples of ones that I like, the Aura of the False Idol. It drains... well, actually, the variant drains health from you. This one will heal you, but then puts you to sleep. Whereas the variant, the Aura of the Vampire Lord, actually drains your health and gives it to the person who built the trap. The Illiquiator, that's another term. Apparently just the person who laid down a trap. Illicator, which the designer uses quite a bit as basically the person who laid the trap and thus gets a lot of these effects. So, for example, something might be like a pool that allows the Illicator to spy on the person that's on the other side and, going through their business and going through the dungeon. The Bone Storm, I really like this idea on page 8. This can either be a pile of bones, which of course a lot of players are going to think, oh, that's going to animate into a bunch of skeletons that are going to attack us. Well, in this case, it kind of subverts that a little bit because it's just animates into a swirling pile of bones that just slashes at you with piercing damage. Or you can put it on an actual undead and still have a skeleton. And, maybe a skeleton they might not be too afraid of, but then when they kill this skeleton, it explodes and then deals that damage. And then suddenly you've got much, much scarier skeletons that pretty much always do that damage, and you just don't want them near you. That's actually a really cool effect. Escape tunnel. Oh, and corpse walls are cool too. Or it's does necrotic damage if you just try to get over this pile of bodies. Or you can do the animated corpse variant, which of course uses very Walking Dead style, just a wall of bodies that you have to try to climb over, and they're meanwhile trying to attack you as you're doing it. I thought that was a neat effect and very dark. Escape tunnel is a good example of, this is literally just a tunnel that, the person who laid the trap can just run through, usually in a chase sequence. However, the variants all add interesting effects to that tunnel. For example, bits of it can collapse while you're trying to run through it, or it's lined with all these sharpened spikes and stakes. You can barely squeeze through all these areas while they're stabbing you. Very much reminded me of the Saw franchise. Or maybe they're just fungus that are going to explode with poisons. It almost creates like a little mini dungeon gauntlet crawl right there, which are just different variants of the same escape tunnel idea. Effigy's Gaze is, of course, a classic evil portrait thing. In this case, the variant can actually turn you to stone, which is really bad. But otherwise, it polymorphs you into another creature, which I kind of used that in Tomb of Annihilation. I actually changed another trap into, I think it was going to turn somebody into a wereboar. Instead, I just turned them into an actual boar. So I thought that was a fun effect right there. Now, as you're seeing these pictures, I have mixed feelings about this. I didn't actually include them on a pro or a con, which means I was ended up being, the advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out. But I appreciate that we did get art here. What they did is they just included some kind of abstracted art that is adjacent to what these traps are about, because it is hard to get art for traps. I get that. The best case scenario, which I have seen in previous trap books, is you actually model these cool 3D illustrations, or you could do 2D too, of just like side view of like, here's how the actual trap is constructed, here's what it looks like. Those are amazing. Instead, what we just get here is some art that has to do with some of the effects. Like there's a fireworks trap, it's just a bunch of fireworks, or the classic fire-breathing statue is just some fire going out. It's not, I don't know, it's not great art that I don't think, but I'm glad that we at least got some art. I think otherwise, the layout looks fine and everything. So to me, it was kind of a wash. Like I wasn't a big fan of the decision here, but I'm glad that we at least got some art, and it does have to do with the actual traps here. It's not just a bunch of stock art, in other words. So that I appreciate, and that ended up being kind of a wash for me. The Eye of the Fowler is a great name, but also a great idea, which is essentially a preserved beholder eye that acts as like a sentry turret that unleashes one of the beholder eye rays, like a paralyzing gaze or telekinesis or sleep or fear, all the cool nasty shit that beholders can do to you. I thought that was a really neat idea. And you can actually cover the eye and thus disable the trap, so it adds kind of an interesting element to maybe a possible trap room. Field of Dreams is a hallucinogenic flower field, which can cause people to do different, kind of the confusion spell, I believe, where they kind of do nothing, or maybe they attack somebody, or they move in random directions. So when I got to this one, I started thinking one thing that this supplement is missing is combining some of these traps or rooms with other effects, because I guess not all of them need to have, combat or dangerous things happening. Sometimes it is interesting just having an effect that isn't necessarily dangerous, and some of them are just alarms or other things. But I think of the potential you could have with the Field of Dreams when you have a creature suddenly in this room that maybe is immune to the effects, like a construct or something. that's wailing on the players while they're all trying to get over this, losing their turns, and that becomes suddenly a way different fight. Or maybe you have other creatures that have stumbled into this room who are being affected by it. Suddenly it's just mass chaos. Some of you are passing out, and others are attacking random allies and all that. That could be really interesting too. I think there was just a missed opportunity to include some sample encounters or ways to combine, or ways to combine these traps with other traps as well. And that's probably the easiest way to create complex traps, is you just kind of combine multiple traps together. The Field of Etherealness can actually turn you into incorporeal, which could have huge effects for your dungeon, a way for maybe people to pass through other rooms. Or again, you want to create those multi-step traps. Maybe you've got another situation where there's, you can disable the trap if you have to pass through the wall, but you'd have to be affected by this, ethereal realm. But maybe it does something else. For example, some of them cause you to see like the dead ghosts of loved ones. And that has some debilitating effects. Or maybe you're teleported to random places, and maybe that room also includes some dangerous elements. So I was really reading these two fields and thought they were really cool ideas, but they would be mostly cool if you combine them with other effects. So I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity to combine some of these traps and thus create some of those complex traps that become really interesting, and one of the reasons why death trap dungeons like the Tomb of the Nine Gods are so dang interesting. The Grasp of the Dead is a really cool idea. You open a book and this undead hand comes out. It doesn't attack you. Instead, you're just supposed to grab it, and then you can use your other hand to flip through the book. But if you're not the person who created this interesting trap, then it starts dealing psychic damage to you. Which that could be an interesting idea if you combine that with the fact that you're trying to get certain information from the book, maybe, and thus you're trying to go like a certain number of rounds to be able to withstand this psychic damage from the book. So just neat idea there. And yes, I did write these down because there's a lot here. The Grotto of Levitation is straight up that one trap from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one, where they go in and they're rising up. I think they drink something, and they start floating up to the ceiling, and there's like blades up there. In this case, I think it's just supposed to be spikes, but it doesn't really matter. But in any case, it's an anti-gravitational room. You shoot upstairs. And yes, Tomb of Annihilation had that exact same thing going on. But if you're gonna have 100 traps, you're gonna cover everything. So I'm not gonna knock this book on covering the base. Like, yes, there's a pit trap thing here. There's hidden walls and traps and false walls and all, and false ceilings and all these different things. So there were a few that I picked out that I thought were completely original to me, that I thought were neat ideas, like that Grasping of the Dead one for the book. I thought that was really neat. And then you're gonna just get a bunch that, of course, you've already seen, but it is still, I think, nice and helpful to be able to have like the rules broken down for you pretty easily. So if you want to just add that, you can just flip through this and be like, okay, how did this person do it? Okay, I see. That makes sense. And then I can change the DC and damage as I need to scale it to my party. Like these chains that just appear. A gyve, by the way, is apparently another word for shackles. I'm learning all kinds of stuff with this supplement. That when you touch a certain enchanted object, these shackles and chains appear that can drag you to the ground. And in this case, the base version are made of like icy, so they do ice damage to you. But there are different versions that can deal burning damage, or maybe even psychic damage if they're mind shackles, which could have a really cool visual or maybe not visual effect. You just kind of look like you're shackled. Mira Virtue is a neat idea where you have to pass through an area, and of course it shows your reflection, and it punishes evil aligned player characters. So it could be a defense for some kind of holy temple or something, because if you're good, it actually bestows different blesses upon you. Literally, one of them is the bless spell if you're lawful good. But if you're any kind of good, it gives you, or if you're even lawful neutral, it gives you bonuses like 2d10 temporary hit points or immunity being frightened. If you're true neutral, nothing happens. And if you're any kind of evil or even chaotic neutral, then bad things start to happen. It starts having debilitating effects. That was a really cool idea, because usually alignment doesn't come into play that often. So that was pretty cool. The Portent of Doom is interesting because you walk into a room, you start making saves, and you just kind of end up building anxiety, which is terrible. But essentially, after a couple rounds, just different things, which the players kind of have to role play this. It's not a whole lot of actual mechanical things. It's like you're shoving people out of the way, you're basically starting to cry doom and gloom. It's almost like a feeling of just malaise sets over the players, which again could be combined with other interesting things, which is some missed opportunities. But that's a cool idea that I hadn't read, like the mechanics of how do you actually do this to the players, and it happens after several rounds. Another cool example of that is the Unholy Blessing, which is literally like a curse placed on some kind of drinking, chalice or something. And if you drink from it, good things happen immediately, which is cool. You regain all your hit points. You get a +2 to all your stuff within the next hour. Which the fun thing about that is, obviously, you have somebody, your most foolhardy party member test it, and they drink it, and they're like, oh, I feel great. And then everybody lines up to take a sip. And then once the hours start passing, bad things start happening. An hour after drinking, you must make a con save or become cursed, and then you have disadvantage and everything. And then 2 hours pass. You have to make another con save, or you take necrotic damage from abdominal pains, and it just keeps on building, and eventually you actually vomit out a little homunculus, which is disgustingly awesome. So really, really cool idea with the Unholy Blessing there. Vessel of Avarice is the variant, at least Vessel of Blood, is straight up out of Tomb of Annihilation. The Tomb of the Nine Gods has this part where you have to spill blood into a container in order to like open a magic door or something. Again, really cool idea, and also very, very Saw-like. It's just a lot of these different traps end up, just cool concepts where the players can see what happens and they still like have to do it in order to like succeed at it, which is very messed up and dark in a very fun way, which is why the Saw franchise went like 8 or 9 movies, for example. So I think it's a cool supplement. I think there's a lot of good ideas here. Yes, you're going to get a lot of the ones that you expect to see. The usual suspects. In fact, I can go through a montage here. False walls, noxious gases, fire-breathing statues, collapsing ceilings, annoying curses, blinding lights, crushing objects, hallucinogenic fields, and of course, the classic pit trap. You're going to get everything here, which is, I think, very useful to have in a single supplement. You're going to get really fun variants for all these different things. It's well put together. It's decently written. There's nothing, wrong with it necessarily. I would have liked to see it a little better organized, I think, especially in regards to level. Yes, I understand you can scale the DC and damage, but I think, like I mentioned earlier, there's still some traps that can be that just feel like they're designed for lower levels versus higher levels, and vice versa. Some of them are just more simple, and some of them are more outlandish and exotic. So even though the DC and damage might change, some of them are still more appropriate to find in different kind of tiers of play. So I would have liked to see that organization for sure. Let's go over my pros and cons for traps, trammels, and triggers. Pro, 100 traps of every variety you could ask for. I only went over, I think, maybe a dozen of these, and there's just some really, really cool ideas. And some of them not so cool, but that's fine. I think there's a huge variety, and that is a huge plus. And pro, every trap has several variants that alters the trap in interesting ways. Almost every trap. Some of these, in fact, we're looking at a page right now, doesn't necessarily have variants on there, but there's enough cool ideas where you have your classic, falling log or slicing, axes or scythes or whatever, and then there'll be some kind of alternate version of that where it changes either the damage slightly or does something where it's like, all right, I see you went the extra mile in trying to create different versions when you had, even when you had traps that were more mundane or ones that you would see all the time, you at least tried to make different variants of that, and I do appreciate it. For the cons, pretty much what I mentioned earlier, which is the traps are not organized by level or complexity, which I would have seen just at a glance made it easier, and I still think some traps are more suited for different tiers of play, even though you can, of course, scale the damage in DC. And the other con is that there's no complex multi-step traps or combination of traps or sample encounters with traps. Basically, I would have loved to see more combining of either multiple traps together, which creates a multi-step trap, or using them in combination with different encounters. I don't necessarily think you have to do that for everything. I do think the exploration pillar of D&D is very underserved, and it is nice to be able to just have a room without any monsters in it. But some of these traps and areas create basically layers, like interesting, almost layer actions for what would normally be just a normal fight. So I think in environmental effects, which is a great way to spruce up any combat encounter. So I would have liked to see those kind of sample combinations being utilized. Final verdict: from swinging sides and binding shackles to preserved beholder eyes, traps, trammels, and triggers has enough ideas and varieties to make even John Kramer satisfied. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Stan, Nathan, Alex, Chad, Alexander, Dan, Cam, Quizats, Hatterack, and William. And gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam Ross, Limpy Spuds, Drums, Scalenia, Nick, Farty McButterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, and James. Thank you all very much for your support.